Professor David Heilpern, welcome into the weeds.
Thank you so much. I've been longing for this invitation for a long time. I've been lying in bed awake at night thinking, why hasn't he invited me?
You're very, very sincere,
Totally.
I've got to say. You are a very famous man of the law, a barrister, also now a professor and of laws, and also the dean of the faculty at Southern Cross University. So you know a bit about the subjects we're about to talk about.
A little bit.
A little bit. Mate, this podcast goes out to a lot of people very interested in cannabis law reform. One of the big areas that's screaming out for reform in this country is how we do deal with roadside drug testing of cannabis in the context that we have legalised medicinal cannabis in Australia. You've been an advocate in this area. You've been a part of the group Drive Change. Tell us about how the laws are supposed to work, why they don't work, and what we need to do. In 10,000 words or more. Go.
Okay.
Just feel free.
Look, I think the starting point on this is absolutely crucial. We could have complete cannabis law reform in terms of possession, cultivation, use, and yet we could still have very minimal take-up of all the benefits of cannabis recreationally and medicinally because of this insane, stupid, unprecedented law. So it's absolutely crucial that this gets changed. And I see it as being more important than many of the other drug issues that we've all spent time on over the years, like medicinal cannabis and legalising recreational use and enabling people to grow a couple of plants. And it's so crucial because you could have all the amendments in the world, and if people can't drive, then they can't use. It's that simple. So that's how crucial it is. So when talking about drug driving laws, it's really important to distinguish between driving under the influence, that is people who are weaving all over the road and are dangerous, and those with a detectable level of drugs in their system. And way back when these laws were introduced, cannabis was completely illicit. In other words, it was illegal, full stop. And I don't know if you were a member of the parliament, Lee Rhiannon actually voted in favour of drug driving laws in New South Wales because it was only dealing with all the illicit drugs. That's changed now.
I think it was 2006.
Yeah.
So it was at least a decade prior to us legalising medicinal cannabis at a federal and state level.
So now that it's legalised, there is absolutely no reason why cannabis should not be treated as every other prescription drug. And the rules about a detectable level should be removed for cannabis. I mean, if you can get...
Because the RDT only tests for presence. It is not testing. It is not a test of impairment. There's not a threshold you have to go past in terms of quantity. It purely is a positive test, and there's false positives and false negatives in it, but it purely tests for presence, and it is not a test at all in terms of impairment or being under the influence, as the other part of the law suggests.
Completely different concepts. And the levels are very small. 5 nanograms, that's 500,000 of it's like minute quantities in your saliva. And so people have it in there for days after using their medicinal cannabis or their recreational cannabis, and so they can get caught. And there is nowhere else in the world that does roadside drug testing to the extent that we do. In fact, in Australia, we do more tests, roadside drug testing for THC than the entire rest of the world combined.
That is an incredible point.
It is, and worse than that, it is unproven. Like before you introduce road safety measures, you'd think you would have a trial to see, well, is this going to reduce the road toll? Is this going to be effective? But there is absolutely no assessment of the effectiveness. It's incredibly expensive, not just in terms of the cost per test. What happens is, out of the road safety budget per test, money goes to the police budget for these tests. So what we're doing is we're robbing things from better street lighting, from more pedestrian crossings, from safer corners, just to pay police to do these random drug side tests, and all the police time. Anyone who's had one of these tests, and I've had many, surprisingly, I get pulled over quite regularly for these tests.
Oh, I'm not surprised.
And it's 10, 15 minutes per test. And that's time that police, we're talking 200,000 tests in New South Wales alone, well over 120,000 in Victoria, similar numbers in Queensland. That's police time that could be used doing things like investigating child sexual abuse or policing domestic violence or other road safety measures that we know work, like speeding. So what we're left with is a legacy law, and it just needs to catch up with the times.
And it's not applied evenly, because I live in the inner city now in Sydney, and I've never seen an RDT in Newtown or the inner west. Yet on the north coast, where you're a resident of, they're everywhere.
They are indeed, and we only you and I both went to Mardi Gras this year, and I go regularly, and completely surrounding the town of Nimbin and to every entrance is a drug test. It's not random. That's untrue, and especially with registration plate recognition technology as it is, if you've ever been caught before for drug driving or have any drug offences relating to that motor vehicle, you'll get pulled over, and pulled over all the time. So it's not random. It's not a safety measure. So why are they continuing to do it? And that's the really interesting part, because we all know that it needs to change. The Drug Summit said it needs to change. Drive change, the industry, politicians, we all know it needs to change. But let's ask ourselves, why hasn't it changed? And I think there's three reasons. Number one, the police stand in the way of change right around Australia for any drug driving testing. Why? Because it increases their police budget. And that's the only reason. Secondly, we've got to look at the alcohol industry. The alcohol industry is one of the biggest donors to the New South Wales government. And if people can use medicinal cannabis and recreational cannabis without fear in terms of driving, then there's going to be a lot. The alcohol industry sees it as a threat. And the third aspect of change is the good old Murdoch press. And don't they always do it? The shock jocks, the Daily Telegraph, they are, every time this change is mooted, they come out with horror stories about how the road toll will go completely to, up at stratospheric levels.
And they'll find someone who's been drug driving, and they'll have a cocktail of, being up all night on methamphetamines, cocaine, alcohol, and some cannabis, and point the finger at cannabis. And in the regime that advocates are talking about, we're saying that those other things, like being impaired on any drug or impaired at all, should remain illegal. And of course, we don't want anyone, driving if they're on meth or coke or.
Look, and although the evidence is mixed about the dangers of driving stoned, in the interests of change, I think we're all prepared to accept that if you're driving under the influence, it remains illegal. If we start from that point, then we look at, well, what have other places done? Well, Tasmania has a defence. It has a defence that says if you're using in accordance with your prescription and you're not driving in a negatively affected way, and you have a prescription, then there is a defence. And the road toll in Tasmania hasn't gone through the roof. In fact, and I'm not claiming that this is because of their drug driving laws, it's the only state that has a decreasing road toll.
And it has the highest cannabis use per capita in Australia.
So if changing this drug driving law was going to have a negative impact, we would have seen it in Tasmania. We haven't. But not only that, Australia seemingly is the only country in the world who has random roadside drug testing for THC, in the sense that, we see the booze buses and the drug testing buses setting up and just randomly pulling cars over. That's not how it works anywhere else.
Well, I mean, California's got more than 50 million people. They've legalised adult recreational use of cannabis. They don't have a mass RDT screening system there. And they haven't seen an increase in the road toll, have they?
No. And so, look, for all those grounds, it just needs to change. And since I left the bench in 2022, I've been leading Drive Change, which is industry funded and citizen funded, pushing for this. And I thought it would be a 6-month campaign because it's actually a no-brainer. But here we are, 2025, and we're still arguing the same old thing.
But it is impacting more and more people because people are choosing, well, this medicinal cannabis is, in some cases, saving my life, improving my life. The choice, especially for a magistrate working in regional areas, you would have seen people are making the choice between choosing their medicine over choosing their job or their engagement in the community, because in the absence of like mass public transport, people have to drive in the region. So you would have seen it again and again increasing.
And what really drew my attention to this was a particular case. There was a woman who lived in a town called Wollongong, strangely, who worked at the club cleaning, and she had been on benzodiazepines, barbiturates, and opioids for chronic pain, for depression, for PTSD. She found cannabis, THC by prescription, really, really helped her. And it meant she could shed all of those other prescription drugs. But she got caught drug driving. Now, what is safer? Her using medicinal cannabis in accordance with her prescription, or her going back to her pharmaceuticals with all the grogginess, all the side effects. The research out of Swinburne is that those prescription drugs on any level are more dangerous than THC.
And we don't test for those, do we?
We don't test for them at all.
And if they are an opiate and someone has that, but they've got a medical defence.
Totally. And of course, if you're driving under the influence, in the sense that your driving is adversely affected by those drugs, then of course you can be prosecuted, and you should. So when we say we don't test for them, we don't random drug side test.
Yes.
If someone's attention is drawn to them or they're involved in a serious motor vehicle accident, they'll be tested for them, and that's as it should be. So it has an enormous impact on people in two ways. Number one, because if they do it, then they'll lose their license, they'll be criminalised, they can lose their jobs, contact with family, support systems, medical assistance, all the rest of it, particularly in rural and regional Australia where the nearest hospital might be half an hour away. And not only that, they're going back to their more dangerous prescription drugs to avoid it. So it's lose-lose for the community. Of course, it's win-win for the prescription drug use companies, and I guess
and the alcohol industry, as you say.
Correct.
And one of the other things too is a lot of people take medicinal cannabis to help them with sleep, fatigue. We're learning, well, we've had big driver education programs about fatigue. Fatigue can be a massively impairing factor when you get behind the wheel, can't it?
Oh, absolutely. And all the studies have shown that that is a massively increased risk factor. And how do people traditionally use medicinal cannabis? Well, they take it after dinner and before bed for all those sorts of reasons. And they're then driving 8, 10, 12 hours after they've taken it. There is just no evidence that people who use medicinal cannabis in that way are any sort of significant risk of increasing the road toll and road trauma. So, yes, people are using cannabis in accordance with their prescription, but they're still criminalised. And I just can't think of any other law that says you use as the doctor directs you to use, and you're committing an offence if you get behind the wheel. It's crazy.
It is crazy. Well, David, look, thank you so much for coming into the weeds to explain to us what's going on. I really appreciate your advocacy and you adding your experience and expertise to this campaign to bring about the change we really want to see to our road laws. And it's a campaign the Legalised Cannabis Party is mounting, and we're very hopeful of winning, especially with great advocates like you. So thanks very much for coming into the weeds.
And thank you for being in there and just keeping on pushing this barrow along. We're in it for the long haul, and we will win.
Fantastic, David. Thanks, mate.
Take care. See you.